but it will have something to do with blessings and curses and things like that, because that, in fact, is part of what the book's about. It's an amazing Torah portion. It's one of the longer Torah portions of all the Torah, and it has many wonderful, challenging ideas, including, we should send this to the Obama administration because it's all about health care. It's what you eat and how it affects you, and more powerfully, more potently, in this week's Torah portion, God says to the people, there will be no more poor among you. This is why you can't trust God. God says, there will be no more poor among you when I bring you to the promised land, because this is being said in the desert while during their 40 years of wandering. When I bring you to the promised land, and you establish in the promised land, and you raise your crops, and you are successful, and you have food, and everything is wonderful, there'll be no more poor amongst you. So this was written more than 3,000 years ago. Here we are today. Question of the day, are there still poor amongst us? Just checking to make sure you're conscious. Yes, there are still poor amongst us. Well, not to blame God for not being smart or anything, because in the very next chapter of the same portion, of Remy's portion, God says, so when you enter the land, after saying there will be no more poor among you, then the next thing God says about poor is, when you enter the land and you see poor people, here's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to take care of them. You're supposed to loan them. If your brother needs something, you're supposed to extend yourself and loan them what they need so they can survive. And because you're carefully reading this, you're thinking, didn't God just say there wouldn't be any more poor? And then the next thing is, but if you see any poor, then take care of them. And then the very next paragraph, God says, oh, and by the way, there's always going to be poor. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. They're always going to be poor. And so Remy's portion sort of gives us this messianic vision. Wouldn't it be nice if we were careful, if we were passionate, if we were committed in a way that would eliminate poverty from our society? And that ultimately that's what God wants us to do. That's why God, in Jewish tradition, in this portion, in Remy's portion, says, when you get to the promised land, there should be no more poor. I guess we haven't got to the promised land yet, because ultimately the promised land, even though it seems like it's a journey to a place, oh, here we are, I got there, I'm in the promised land, never quite works out that way, does it? You know, you get to where your goal is, and then all of a sudden there's 50 more goals that have to happen before you really get to where your goal is. It's not about a place. It's about a journey. It's about a journey to the promised land. What makes the Torah so powerful that we read every week is we keep reading the same, we've been reading the same thing for 3,000 years. We never quite get to the promised land. In fact, every time we're in the end of Deuteronomy in a couple of weeks, we're right on the edge of the Jordan River. We're just about to cross over into the land of milk and honey. We start in with Genesis again, and we never get there. It's like, come on, I'm going. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're right on the edge again. We're just about to go in, and we say, time to start in again, reading about creation and reminding ourselves that life is about this process, this journey of becoming. Life is about stages, starting down this stage and then moving to this stage and then moving to some of our older folks like me stage. But you never end. You never get there. You're never done. Your whole life. Your whole life is about growing, learning, trying to perfect the world. Hebrew, we call it tikkun olam, trying to heal the world. It's our challenge. The very beginning of the Jewish people's relationship with God in the Torah is God showing up for Abraham and Sarah, the traditional first Jews of the Torah. And the very first thing that they share with each other is God says to Abraham, here's the deal. I'll be your God, and your job is to become a blessing. Chaim's going to sing about that a little later. That very notion that what our challenge has been since more than 3,000, almost 4,000 years ago, is to figure out what does it mean to be a blessing in the world. And that is certainly not a one-time thing. Look at all, if I asked you to pause for a moment and start thinking of the blessings in your life, which I just did, pause for a moment and start thinking about the blessings in your life, what comes to your mind? Before I end, what comes to your mind? What blessings are in your life? Children, grandchildren, parents. Are your parents here? Just checking. Children, grandchildren, parents. What else? Friends. Don't you love this, that like the first 1, 2, 3, 4 things are all about people? It's not my 401k went back up, you know? Maybe next year you'll say that. But, you know, right now it's thank God I have people in my life. It's the people that bring the blessings in our lives. It's waking up that's a blessing. It's celebrating the day that's a blessing. It's the opportunity to be somebody that's a blessing. And then another opportunity the next day to be somebody again. And that's what Remy's Torah portion reminds us of. Yes, there's always going to be poor, but the punchline of that, there shouldn't be poor. If you see poor, help them. There's always going to be poor. In her portion says, therefore don't harden your heart. Therefore don't say, there's always going to be poor people. Let them take care of themselves. It's not my fault. The Torah says, do not harden your heart against those who are in need. Because if you harden your heart, then no one's there to help them. Because the way God works in the world is we work in the world. That's how those in need get helped. Human beings act godly. And that's the challenge of this portion. So we're going to turn to the Torah portion. If you're being called up for an aliyah blessing before the Torah, you probably know you're going to be called up. Otherwise, the Cantor Frank is going to call you. It'll be like a pop quiz. And this is a Reconstructionist congregation, and one of the things that distinguishes Reconstructionist Judaism from other streams of Jewish life is that long ago we rejected the idea of exclusive chosenness of the Jewish people. And instead we teach that all people